Today's guest on the Pocket Mastermind podcast is happiness expert and founder and CEO of Friday Pulse, Nic Marks. Welcome to the Pocket Mastermind podcast. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Well, very warm welcome, and really interested to have a conversation with you before we get onto the Friday Pulse and what that's all about. It'd be good to get a bit of background as to your journey. I know you're a statistician, therapist, TED Talk, TED speaker, keynote speaker. The list is long. I've seen a picture of you with the Dalai Lama as well, which I want to find out a bit about as well. But let's go back. Let's go to the beginning. Where did you start on your journey that led you to being a happiness expert?
Well, I guess it was one of those random walks through life. I mean, I'm a statistician by trade, so I started out doing health statistics, quality of life statistics, and I eventually started thinking about well-being and happiness. I mean, along the way there, my mother was a family therapist, and I liked my mother. I liked the way that she thought about the world, and I kind of got interested in that world. So I actually trained as a therapist in my late 20s, and I guess that influenced me in that I started thinking more about people's experience of life and their emotional experience, because that's what therapy does. And I kind of in the end merged the two, going more from standard living, quality of life, health statistics into well-being and happiness.
So what was that transition like from therapist into statistician? And
well, I mean, statistician,
how does that merge happen?
Well, statistician came first. I mean, I was good at maths at school, and I was at Cambridge reading mathematics before I'd really thought about anything. I was always top of my year, and I think schools, they like someone to go to Cambridge. So, oh, you're really good, you go there. They didn't actually ask me if I would like maths there. Maths at university is very different than A-level maths, and so I actually found I didn't enjoy it because it wasn't about the real world. It was getting very, very abstract, and I was more interested in solving real world problems, or that's what I discovered anyway. But the therapy was just a side project. It was sort of a weekend thing, really. I mean, I worked a couple of afternoons a week as a therapist, and actually I didn't do it very long, a couple of years. And then I did not like the work, but I just felt it wasn't what I wanted to do with my life, was to be a therapist. You've got to decide that you want to put the care of others before your own ambition in many ways. You want to be a therapist. It's a very selfless task, and you sit in a room with an individual quite a lot of the time. Maybe you can do group stuff, and it's quite, I actually think I might, as I get older and grayer, I might well go back and do that. And I got this fantasy that I'm going to end up looking like Father Christmas. Everyone's going to trust me. and I might do it then, but I've still got another decade or two in me yet of doing other stuff.
It's brilliant. So then what led you really into the, like you say, from the well-being, you started to think about people's experience. How do you then start to think about, or how do we measure that?
I mean, the measurement really is my thing. So basically, I was working a little bit with a think tank in the end of the 1990s, beginning of 2000s, just doing a couple of projects with them. And the director of the think tank said to me, Nick, the word well-being is coming into public policy, and nobody knows what it means. And so he said, so as far as he was concerned, that was an opportunity for a think tank, because there was no think tank that owned that word. And so he said, I'd like you to, his words were literally, drive some meaning underneath that. and my idea was, I said, well, if I did that, I'd like to measure it. I'd like to work out how we measure it, because then that, to me, it feels more solid and you can deal with it more. And so we devised a project, we raised some funding, and I started work there, not full time to begin with. And the work built over time, and it became successful. Sort of about 2004, we started to publish, and by 2006, we had a globally recognized wellbeing center. And it was because we were doing something different, in that there were academics doing work on wellbeing and subjective wellbeing, it's called, or happiness or quality of life. But they weren't really engaging with policymakers. And I was coming from the other side of like, well, what do policymakers need, and how can I intelligently understand academia and apply it? So I guess we just hit a spot, and people loved it because there was measurement and numbers, so it became tangible. And it was actually really very successful program of work. I mean, we had a goal that, that we get the Welsh Assembly to announce that they would measure well-being, and David Cameron then announced that the whole country was, about 6 months later. And so we actually made a big impact. We weren't the only people working in the space, but we were one of the dominant 2 or 3 players in the UK. And we achieved an awful lot, and I ended up doing a TED talk on it. I mean, I suppose that is a mark of success of what the work you're doing. And I wrote a TED book about it. But I sort of accidentally got into it, but it was a great decade.
And so what do you measure exactly when you're trying to measure well-being in a population? What's the method behind that?
I mean, it's fundamentally disappointing, really, in that we are sort of structured surveys about people, and we'll ask people simple questions, if you consider your life overall, how satisfied are you nowadays on a scale of 0 to 10? Or how happy did you feel yesterday? Or how anxious did you feel yesterday? Or and so it's effectively, people have ways of measuring what could be called depression, or other common mental health disorders. They'll ask you about symptoms, like, do you feel lacking in energy? Can you not sleep? And people will answer, not at all, to, whatever. And it's the same way, but we look at the positives, and we look at, what is functional behavior. And often we found that public mental health has been focused on the negative, been thinking about how do they deal with suffering, which is a noble thing to do, but the absence of suffering is not necessarily flourishing. And so you need to think about how you can measure that positive side. And that's what basically what I got interested in, and the work we did. And I was involved in, pretty groundbreaking work. We did a huge survey across the whole of Europe, 40 nations. No, that's an exaggeration. 28 nations across Europe. It was 40 questions. That's where I had the 40 from. On people's personal and social well-being. And, we're able to sort of create national accounts of well-being and league tables of well-being across Europe in quite a detailed way. And that helped push policymakers to think, what could they do at this level? We were always basically trying to get on the agenda of policymakers, of national statisticians. I got to know the national statistician of the UK, and talked with her about what we were doing. And that was all part of what led to the Cameron government eventually creating indicators of wellbeing.
And are you able to then identify the underlying contributing factors towards those scores? And what patterns were you able to see across the country?
Well, I mean, there's academics and other researchers who do a lot of this work. There's actually something called the World Happiness Report that comes out every year. It ranks nations, and it looks at the underlying factors that do it, and factors that at a national level, explain the differences between nations. Now, it's different than explaining within nations. So the things between nations are things like GDP per capita, like we would expect, of course. Richer countries are happier because, people have got more resources.
Shiny stuff.
Yeah, I mean, not really the shiny stuff, actually. It's more that it goes with health indicators.
Oh, right. So you got the standard quality of living or basic quality of living, I guess.
Yeah, and the countries that do best are the Scandinavian countries, and that's partly to do with, wealth. They're wealthy countries, but it's also to do with distribution of income, in that they're fairly equal countries. And when countries are more equal and they have higher social safety nets, it means that the poorest members of the society are less miserable. Okay, so when they see the national
your lag measures or your lagging indicators are less laggy than
they're less pulling the mean down. So even in the UK, which is much more unequal than, say, Sweden or Norway or Finland, or Denmark, those countries, we're much more unequal. Our poor drag down our scores much more. And the US is even more so. So the US is less happy than the UK. The UK is less happy than Scandinavia.
And do you find that's quite determined regionally?
Within the UK, we do see differences, but actually, partly related to GDP. But I mean, if I was to ask you, what do you think would be the happiest region in the UK?
I would always say that somewhere up north would probably be happier, because whenever I go there, everybody talks to each other and there's a sense of community. And you feel down in the south.
You're not far wrong. I mean, London is the least happy region.
Right.
And that takes some people by surprise because they think, oh, London's paved with gold. And of course, actually part of the reason is that it's got the highest income inequality, in that if you're towards the bottom of the income distribution in London, it's right in your face. You see all these people out in swanky cars, swanky restaurants, and you see it every day, and you think, I wish I was like them. So that makes you feel more, lower self-esteem, lower confidence, more jealous. So, there's a negative feeling. So you also have a huge density of population, and that's tends to lead to more conflict, more stress. Pace of life is faster, more pollution, air pollution, noise pollution that affects you. So there's all sorts of negative things that go on there. Whereas rural populations tend to be happier. People like space. They like to have grown up in the place they are. If you've got a sense of place, a sense of belonging, that's a strong part of it. But it turns out the happiest region of the UK is actually Northern Ireland.
Oh, really?
And it's interesting because most people that takes by surprise, but I mean, they're Irish for a start. I mean, if you go to Northern Ireland, you get picked up in a taxi at the airport and you're just having a nice chat with whoever you're with. And they've also got recent experiences of the Troubles. So they've actually got a recent bad experience to compare themselves to. So that actually sort of helps people feel better with how they are now. Plus they're mainly rural, they're not big density of population. So, and I mean, strong sense of community, although of course there's a rather large in and out group, depending whether you're Catholic or Protestant, but so there are, but actually if you're within a strong community, you get the benefits of that more than you get the negative effects of being not in the other community.
And so you tend to see, on average, cities have a lower score than maybe more rural areas,
Sure.
but London in general has a lower score, city versus city, or?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I'd have to actually look at that more carefully if I wanted to compare London and Manchester or Birmingham. I haven't looked at it in that way because the way that the data in the UK tends to be presented is London, and then in the other regions,
Right.
And the other regions contain cities but are not just cities, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
So I couldn't give you a strong answer to that, but I mean, just as a general rule, cities are less happy than rural, that's for sure.
It'd be interesting to see how that, that comparison, particularly in places like Manchester versus London, may change over time, because obviously London's always had a lot of economic migration, and so people that aren't originally from there, who a lot of people living by themselves, maybe when things like COVID is just happening now, when that happens and you're more isolated, maybe that has a contributing factor. And obviously with all there's been a lot of investment in Manchester over the last 10 years or so, and more migration heading in that direction. I wonder whether fewer Mancunians might influence their happiness score.
I wouldn't know. One can speculate either way. What tends to happen is that communities that are more stable are happier than ones that have more mixed people. That might not be one that someone like me that's sort of quite a liberal to believe, but that tends to be what happens. So I don't know. I mean, for me, my data is my sort of guru. So I don't like to comment too much when I don't know the data well.
Maybe you can measure that at some point and see whether it comes to fruition or not.
The data is there. It exists.
Yeah.
I just never looked at it personally.
Interesting.
So someone out there will know that answer.
And along that journey somewhere, the Dalai Lama came in, and I've seen this picture, so I was going to talk to you about how that came about.
Well, the actual picture came about because he was the keynote at a conference I was speaking at, and but my connection to and the reason I was sort of introduced to him, which sounds exceptionally grand, that means I spoke to him for 45, 60 seconds.
45 or 60 seconds more than most people.
Is that I work with Bhutan quite a bit, and the Kingdom of Bhutan, which is in the Himalayas. It borders Chinese-occupied Tibet. It borders with Nepal. It borders with some of India, and it sits on partly on the Tibetan plain, and then drops down into the jungles of northern India. And it's a kingdom. It's an ancient kingdom. It's a Buddhist kingdom, which has meant that they have a tricky relationship with refugees from Nepal, and there is a whole group of people who think the Bhutanese are very bad. They have committed atrocities. There is a case against them for ejecting a whole load of people from Nepal. I don't know quite the ins and outs of it. It's absolutely not very decent behavior. That's absolutely for sure. But in Bhutan, it's quite secretive. So whenever I was there and I try and ask them about what they call the southern problem, you never quite knew. But within Bhutan, and the bits of Bhutan I was dealing with, which was the Buddhist community, is that they're very interesting in their approach to economic growth, and that they really do think about whether it can bring benefits to their citizens. And so they have this idea and this ideal called gross national happiness. Now, the ideal and the reality of it, there's a gap, and they wanted to measure gross national happiness, and they want to make a big fanfare about how it's an alternative to GDP. And I was one of many people that advised them over a period of time. But I did spend two-month periods there working with their so-called statisticians, but actually they had low statistical capacity in the country. They're a small country, 650,000 people, so you can't expect them to have that. But and they have an indicator, gross national happiness. I happen to hate it because I don't think it's really measuring what they should have done. But their spirit of what they're doing was great, and that's how I got introduced to him. And there's a lovely photograph of me, which is
a very nice photograph of you.
I put on it on social media at the time, and so it's still there.
Well, you would do, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Picture of the Dalai Lama. You're not going to hide that one.
And he is an extraordinary human being in that this sort of charismatic joy just emanates from him, and he just beams, and just makes you feel good for being alive. So that was rather lovely.
What did you manage to say in that 45 to 60 seconds?
Oh, so I mentioned Bhutan, and I also mentioned something called Action for Happiness, which I'm a board member of in London, and he is the patron of. And I just said some niceties, really, just
It's good.
What do you say in 45 seconds?
This is the thing. It's hard to know what to say, isn't it? When you end up in that situation.
Yeah.
And so then how did that transition into Friday Pulse and measuring the experience of employees?
Yeah, so I worked at this think tank in London for just over a decade, and as I said, it was rather accidental. It was literally this challenge from the director, but of course I had a lovely time with them for a decade, and I worked on well-being and climate change, particularly sustainable development, about how can we be effectively environmentally efficient at delivering well-being. I mean, that seems to me that's the goal. That's what something I created called the Happy Planet Index was about, and that's what my TED talk was mainly about. But after about a decade, I wanted to do something different, and I think that's not a bad thing to do in life. Every 10, 15 years is change tack a bit, And I thought, well, I'm in my late 40s. I can think about doing certainly one more big project, maybe two. So I ought to get on with it. And I started to think what I wanted to do. And I thought work was an interesting, ripe area for a bit of disruption, and particularly the measurement of employee experience, which, I thought was pretty rubbish. It's sort of annual surveys vaguely about staff engagement or staff satisfaction, and not really well defined. I don't think really fit for purpose, in the sense that I don't believe there was very good action on that data. I don't think it was very responsive to what's going on. An annual survey, they tend to do it. There tend to be too many questions. People tend to look at it and think, oh my God, I've got to fill this out. So then you've got people approaching it without great energy. So you haven't got great data, not necessarily authentic. It takes so long to analyze that by the time you're starting reporting back, all of the teams have changed on the ground. Their challenges have changed. So you're acting on data that's out of date. I mean, you wouldn't act on customer data that was 3 months old. You want to act on data that's immediate. And so I thought there's something to be done there. So I've done it.
Yeah, my experience has been with those annual surveys is exactly that. They're huge questionnaires, and people end up kind of skipping through them very quickly. Some of the questions are quite ambiguous, and so even when you do get the after action report, you spend months trying to work out what people actually meant when they answered this particular question in a certain way, which probably indicates the question wasn't great in the first place. And loads of time's gone by.
It might not be that the question's bad, but what tended to happen, I must admit, I made the same mistake when I started thinking about work. I used to do 40 questions and I'd do a survey and do a workshop afterwards to interpret it. And you could tell that I'd often do a workshop with small organizations or teams, about 30 people, and we look at the results, and quite often the CEO or the senior leaders would start picking at a question. And you knew that's because they didn't want to engage with the big picture. They wanted to get into the detail and undermine the detail so they didn't have to deal with the big picture. And so I think a lot goes on with it. And so I actually decided that the best way, over time, the best way was to try and get the big picture captured statistically really well, and the detail could come secondary. So instead of asking lots of questions, occasionally we ask one question repeatedly. And that question is, how have you felt at work this week? And I'll get people to answer from very unhappy to very happy. And the idea is that's a very good, bad signal. Is their work going well? And it's very firmly located in them. The reason I ask how you felt and how happy you are is I want your emotional experience. If I ask you, how well has your work gone this week? People immediately start thinking in terms of the organization's agenda, whether they've achieved their task. They don't think about their emotional experience. I want to know people's emotional experience because you are an expert in your emotional experience. So that's the data that's reliable and that I want. And then once you've got that good bad signal, you can cut it and you can say, look, team morale is like this in these teams, it's like this in these teams. So you start identifying where hot and cold spots are in the organization, which places are under stress, which places are doing well. And you can't disagree with the data because even the CEO can answer that question. The CEO can answer, have you had, were you unhappy or happy at work this week? They can answer that, how you felt at work. So.
And I think the question is, how have you felt at work kind of eliminates or to a certain degree eliminates the external factors. It is more asking them how they feel about how they felt at work and maybe, because if you just say, how have you felt this week?
Yeah.
then that could muddy it, I guess.
Well, you're
going to be influenced, aren't you? But
yes, there's something we call spillover effects. It's like you have different domains of your life and factors spill over. So actually, a spillover effect from work to personal life is work-life balance, or stress. And if you take that home, you actually open up ethical issues. You open up, if basically you're stressing out your employees and they're going home and, being miserable with their families and their kids and their partners, then, that's not very good, is it? But actually, of course, people that are very happy and stable in their home lives come to work with more energy. So you can't stop the two things interacting, but the question is designed to be mainly about work and to focus on that. And they do have independence. I've had times in my life when, work was going really well and my home life wasn't. And so, these things have some independence and some relationship.
Are there any particular things like presenteeism that you're able to identify, or organizations where there is a culture of working much later or starting earlier and their happiness score that you can directly compare different organizations against each other and say, well, this is what the culture's like in this organization, this is what it's like in this organization, and there's a difference in the employee experience?
So I have a particular take on how you should measure culture, and it's not necessarily the way that some other people think about it, because of course you can look at long hours cultures and whether they exist, or you can look at whether there's bullying, discrimination, you can look at all sorts of things and positive things too. My thoughts on this is that culture has to be experienced somewhere, and it's experienced in the individuals who are in that organization. So my measure of culture is how happy is the organization, because if you've got a good culture, people like working there and they're good. Now there are different drivers of that, and and we see differences across different sectors, we see differences across different organizations. So we look at 5 big drivers of positive experience at work. We call them the 5 ways to happiness at work, and they are connect, be fair, empower, challenge, inspire. And by that, I mean, connect is relationships. Do you get on with your team members? Do you get on with other teams? Do your friends at work? And being fair is about being respected. It's about fair pay. It's about being appreciated at work. It's about work-life balance. Empowering is about being able to be yourself, being trusted and delegated to playing to your strengths, influencing your work. Challenge is about stretch. It's about learning. It's about feedback processes so you can learn. That's what challenge is about. And then inspire is about meaning, purpose, accomplishment, pride in the organization, those sort of things. And you can think of that as like a Maslow if you want to. The very bottom would be the be fair, and then the relationships would come on, whatever like that. We tend to start with connect because it's the one that's the biggest effect size, that relationships are the biggest one. So, so those are the sort of factors. And then of course there's details that go on with that in that, if you had a long work hours culture, then work-life balance wouldn't be good, and it might be that, if you're a younger organization with younger people, perhaps people don't mind that their work-life balance isn't so great. Whereas if they've got families or older, they're going to mind more. So there'll be differences between organizations. It's difficult differences between sectors, we find typically that something like advertising agencies will have great challenge, great empowerment, treated fairly, good relationships, but maybe people don't find them the most meaningful work sometimes. And actually what do they tend to find is ad agencies often find people in their early 30s start moving to do work that they find more meaningful. Not-for-profits have the opposite thing, where people find their work very meaningful, but maybe they don't find the internal systems are great or the relationships aren't great. I mean, I've rarely seen bitterness and fighting as much as sometimes within not-for-profits. It's quite interesting that, they've got this external aspiration to save the world and actually don't like each other. So, I mean, there's things that go on like that. And it's basically different fingerprints for different organizations. And there's sector things that we can see, like, if you're an accountant, then the biggest factor that will improve your happiness at work is?
No idea. I'm not an accountant.
Feeling appreciated.
Really?
Because they don't feel appreciated. So the ones that do feel appreciated and they feel a bit of love, they're the ones that, really do. Whereas, if you're in a profession which has probably got more appreciation in it, such as, frontline care or something like that, it will probably be work-life balance or something like that, or learning or something like that. So there are different things for different sectors that come out first. Yeah. And we see this. And if in your own work, if you've got a job you're not particularly happy with, then, think of those 5 things: connect, be fair, empower, challenge, inspire. One of those will be going wrong for you, at least.
Oh, at least. Yeah, I'd imagine so.
Yeah.
And then so how do organizations take the information that you're gathering and then apply it to positively impact the employee experience and the culture in those 5 areas?
Yeah, actually, in lots of ways, this is something I sort of learned from therapy, which is that I used to go to see this lovely old therapist. I mean, she probably was in her 60s when I saw her. She's sadly passed away now. I think it actually should be illegal for wise old people to die. I think they just shouldn't be allowed to die. She was lovely. She was called Nan. And she used to say to me, Nick, really, a therapist only does 3 things. They listen to their clients, they reflect back to them what they've heard, and then they work with them to identify what better ways of living. And we do the same thing with statistics, in that we listen to our population, we reflect back with our reporting, and we try and help them move towards better futures. And the whole Friday Pulse platform is built on that principle. It's basically a real-time feedback loop. So on a Friday, there's a clue in the name, Friday Pulse.
It was a Monday, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, there is a business called Monday already, isn't there? So
yeah, there is.
I actually have the trademark to Friday.
Really?
In the UK, yeah, and in the US. So we've actually more recently decided we'd call ourselves Friday Pulse, because for SEO and search engines, it's quite hard to just put Friday in. You can't find us. So we decided we'd call ourselves Friday Pulse, so that you could, if you put Friday Pulse in, you find us straight away. Yeah, put Friday in, we're at about page 20. So, but anyway, so we are called Friday.
Trademark a day of the week. It's quite.
Well, I guess that Monday must have done, hasn't it?
True.
Yeah, and the Saturdays, they call themselves that. I don't know. When we were naming the company, we worked with these branding guys and girls, and they were great fun, and they gave us a long list of names. and in there was Friday, and I went, "That's genius. The church has got Sunday. We'll have Friday." and I just love the idea, and it's a happy word, Friday, isn't it? So encapsulates, it's a work word. Monday to Friday, it's a happy word. So it was very, very clever. But the only problem was the SEO issue, which
it's probably a very, very highly used word. So
yeah. So anyway, we're Friday Pulse now, and we still call ourselves Friday quite a lot as a sort of nickname. But on a Friday, we ask people how their week was, and we collect that data. We give them a chance to answer on Mondays if they didn't answer before then. And then we collect all the data and feed it straight back. And we feed it back, yes, to senior leaders, but actually to every team leader gets their own report on a Tuesday whenever they close it. It will show them how happy their team was. But we also ask them, what was the success for you this week? Have you got anyone you want to thank? And any frustrations? And these are written pieces of feedback. And they kind of form the basis for a team meeting. They help a team reflect on what's gone well for them last week and what hasn't. How can they build on the positives? How can they tackle the negatives? And it's getting that very into everybody's week. Because it's not, I think quite a lot of people think that, happiness or engagement is something you do once a quarter. Oh, we'll do something, we'll set aside an afternoon and we'll deal with that then. No, it's in every minute of every day. But take half an hour a week to think about it, you get it into people's working week. So that's what we're designed to be. And that's really the if magic doesn't exist, but if the magic exists, it's in this sort of repeated process. And in a way, again, like therapy's every week, it's actually, you can't just go and see a therapist once and expect a breakthrough. It's something that, if you go to a counselor or therapist or any other practice, whether that's your meditation, indeed, anything that you do. I mean, if you want to get fitter, it's not about doing a one-off marathon. It's about the weekly training, the daily training. It's whatever you do. It's that repeated process that actually brings the results rather than the final outcome. You get a sense of achievement from doing a marathon, but actually your fitness level comes from all the preparation for it. So it's that repeated process, and it needs to get in there, and it needs to just be, have a team leader who is open to hearing feedback, open to listening to their reports, caring about them. Actually this week we're recording is Mental Health Awareness Week. And, with COVID, everybody's mental health is under pressure. Even a sort of happy guy like me is feeling the monotony, the sort
gone on a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, the loss of small freedoms, although, they are coming back now. I mean, it's amazing how grateful we are. We can go for a walk in the park. I mean, who would have thought that? Suddenly that would be a luxury.
I know, which we've taken to doing on a daily basis now, which we didn't used to do before. So if something would come out of it, it's like the evening, they'll go for the evening walk for half an hour, 45 minutes.
Yeah, that'd be good. I think, if you come out of this with better hygiene habits, like, washing our hands more actually would reduce all sorts of problems in society. I mean, it might sound so trivial, but it's true. And we come out, with a little bit more healthy habits. Though I did read someone who said that we've got 3 types of people coming out of COVID. Have you heard this?
No, I haven't.
Let me get it right. A hunk, okay. A chunk, or a drunk. And I thought, well, two out of 3 ain't bad. And I'm not the first. I mean, I think definitely my drinking's gone up. I mean, I'm not a heavy drinker, but it's sort of like, I think 5 days a week I have a drink now. And
it's so easy, isn't it? Because you kind of you get to the end of the day and you think, well, I'm not going anywhere in the morning.
I mean, it's one of the reasons I go out for a walk at the end of the day, is to sort of try and get over that itch of having a drink at 6, which is way too early. So if I go out for a walk at 6, at least I put it off till 7:15, 7:30 then.
I love it. So have you seen quite a big impact from the surveys that you do and the data you collect from the businesses that you work with during this period?
Yeah, totally massive. And actually, I mean, I didn't think to look actually the first couple of weeks, because I was looking at our results because we talk about them, and my team that look after clients, we're talking with their clients. But we didn't design Friday Pulse to be picking up global trends. It's designed to be an internal tool for an organization that helps them manage the challenges that they face. And of course, as much as, and even with an organization, you normally have different things going on. Like, they talk about, oh, we've got one culture, but actually you've got microcultures everywhere. You've got teams under different pressures. And that's actually the benefit of using Friday Pulse, is that you help knowing where you need to pay attention to and who you need to support more. If you're, a people leader or HR exec or senior leader, you can see where to put your resources. That's what it's designed for. But we have an average. So we create we call it happiness KPI for organizations, and it runs from 0 to 100, and over 70 is a good score. We call it green. And, and across all of our client base, the average through 2019 and the early part of 2020 was 69.6, right? And it's going up and down each week. There's things that go, it's a little high at Christmas, a little less high, it was higher in August, and then it drops a bit, there's some seasonal effects, but broadly speaking, 70. COVID hits. And then in the middle of March, it drops to, I think it was 54 across all of our clients. Some clients were like down to 30, 20, some parts of the world maybe had less of an impact. But the average was something like 55 that first week. And then it's come back. But it's now bumbling along at 65 average, 63.5, I think last week, 64.5 the week before.
So it hasn't quite recovered.
No, it hasn't quite recovered. And that 5 points, that's across all of our clients, and that's a big difference. That's a big loss of team morale. And that's a lot of people, less happy than they were. And even though people want to be resilient, we haven't got back to where we are. And so, and of course, you will know this, and everybody will know this. There's a variability of experience there. I mean, I'm fine. I don't, my children are grown up. I live with my wife, who I like, and not only love, I enjoy hanging out with her. So it's very easy. We actually haven't got teens here this week, but we have had teens here. So we're second marriage, and Zoe's got 3 teenagers. They were here for 5 weeks, actually, with their dad now for a couple of weeks, which is a lovely relief. But no, I love them. But so there's nothing. I've got a corner of a room that I can work in. I used to work at home 1 day a week, 2 days a week anyway. It's fine. But some of my team have got a 2 and a 4-year-old in the house, both of them trying to work, no health, no childcare, maybe a partner that's, furloughed or very stressful work or whatever, and they're climbing up the walls.
It'd be interesting. So I think there's going to be a mix, obviously most office-based roles are still working remotely wherever they can. And as obviously we start to go back to work and go into the office, it'll be interesting to see what that impact will actually have, because I'd imagine, I've spoken to quite a few people that have said the good thing that's come out from all of this is that they're not commuting. And in fact, a lot of people are dreading going back to the commute, although they're quite looking forward to working in an office with their colleagues again and all of that stuff. But actually there's elements of what they were doing that they didn't particularly like. Probably as much as they've got the cabin fever of being at home now.
Yeah, I mean, statistically, the commute is the least happy part of the day. Actually, the slight differentiation: the commute to work is the least happy.
Yes, so the one on the way home is not so bad, is it?
The commute back from work is the second most unhappy thing. And
did you find any? It might put you on the spot, but do you find any variance in the way people commute?
Yeah, there definitely is. So when I have looked at data like that if you walk to work, it's much less stressful for you. The length of the commute matters. So if a commute under half an hour is sort of okay. When you go above an hour each way, it becomes quite stressful. Really affects work-life balance. And people that perhaps decide to move out of one of the big cities and commute further in for house prices, maybe for their family to live out thing, and that maybe one of the partners takes on the responsibility of the long commute. They underestimate how much that undermines their work happiness and more importantly their overall mental health, overall well-being. And so long commutes are really bad. Long commutes are really bad on the train or in the car, not much difference. Yeah. But if you bicycle or you walk to work, people tend to be less stressed than they were the other types.
Interesting. And that's good that the government are now putting more money into cycling and walking to work, because hopefully that will have some benefit.
Yeah, I mean, from a sustainability issue, the worst way is to drive. But from a COVID way, the worst thing is to take, the underground, the bus, the train. And so that's a bit disappointing because, with the best will in the world, a lot of people aren't going to start bicycling to work, and you have to live quite close to walk, don't you? So I'm not very convinced of the long-term effects on reducing carbon emissions from this over the next, well, we'll see. But because we were moving a lot away from the car, and of course public transport's very efficient from just a purely energy perspective, so we'll have to see that. But I mean, I wouldn't want to go on a train at the moment.
No,
you don't know where. I mean, it's a really sad thing, isn't it, that we've now,
to be honest, I mean the tube even more so than the
yeah I mean, I was using the tube in early March. I think I was in London up till somewhere around the 14th of March, can't remember, somewhere around that. And and you knew that it was happening and you didn't quite know what. And I just found myself standing on the tube going, trying to sort of breathe less deeply, as if that would help. And it's just really anxiety levels about. And you're looking at people thinking, "Oh, have you got it? Are you dirty?" And it's like, and it brings in this whole negativity and
terrible,
all sorts of biases. I mean, you just instinctively, look at people who look therefore other races. Oh, are they Chinese? Are they, and it's like, it just brings out a whole thing you don't want to be bringing out. So I think we're going to have to do an awful lot of healing, and we've got to be quite a long way away from people feeling comfortable with other people.
Yeah. I mean, even, where I live out in the sticks, really, walking on the path, and I mean, it's never mind 2 meters. I think people give everyone 5 meters of space. It's ridiculous, and it'll be interesting to see what that transition will be like, going back to being within, a reasonable close distance of other people, and how long it takes for people to feel comfortable doing that.
It may never. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, you'd think that. I mean, this is very unfortunate for all sorts of people. You'd think things like theatres and cinemas.
Yeah, I was just going to say the theatre,
are going to really, really struggle to persuade people that they want to do stuff like that. I imagine that. I mean, concerts and festivals. I mean, they're all gone this summer. But I mean, will people even go in 2021? I don't know.
It's hard to know.
Yeah. And I guess
I would say the Tuesday I went out cycling with a friend of mine, because now you're allowed to cycle with one other person, as long as you stay 2 meters apart, of course. And we were riding down not far from Henley, and rounded a corner, and there's a whole group of people, and lots of people stood around waiting for something to come along the road. And it's the first time I've seen a group of people for a while, so it really stood out. And then we rode a little further down the road, and there were even more people, all parked in a field, all lining this country road, waiting for something to come along, and they had all forgotten quite quickly. So who knows is the honest answer.
I mean, outside is actually better than inside, and there's all this evidence that that the wind takes. So maybe outdoor festivals with a lot more space between people will start. I don't know. I mean, people are desperate. I mean, not desperate. People, you could see the beaches this last weekend when it was warm, were full, and of course people want to get outside. I mean, if you lived in a flat with kids in London, oh my goodness, yeah. And so I was very pleased when Boris said, people can sunbathe. That is because that's for your mental health. I mean, it's like
definitely
massively important that people can get outside, and actually maybe would appreciate that more. But I mean, we'll have to see. I mean, basically economic behavior is driven by confidence.
Yep.
And confidence is a psychological experience. And I think people will not be confident spending for a long time. So the recession will be harsh, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's what I'm saying. It's interesting. I think for a change, the press initially weren't really focusing too heavily on that as an impact. It was all about the narrative around the actual COVID. And I think now I've started to notice in the last week that the press is focusing more on the doom and the gloom of the long, deep recession. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy to a certain degree, right? Because the more negative press that there is out there, the more people it influences behavior, and it becomes a kind of a feedback loop all of its own, and probably stay away from it.
So, I mean, we're actually renovating a house at the moment, and we've just had to continue because you can't stop the project once, we'd started in January, and, we need to finish, in the summer. Just have to carry on.
Did you have to pause at any point?
We did not. Our builder was quite clever, but we have not had any discounts or anything, if not the opposite.
Really?
We've got materials going up. And apparently right now there's no plaster available. So for plastering, all the plaster factories in Europe shut down, and there's a European shortage of plaster. So
who would have thought it? Yeah. And just one last question on the Friday Pulse. What kind of organizations do you work with? So we work with a range of organizations, but mostly from 50 to 1,000 people in that range. It's not that it doesn't work with smaller, it's actually just about business models with the smaller. I mean, I use it with my team when we were only 14. Yeah. But and we do have clients larger than 1,000, but at the moment we are offering 3 months for free to any organization size 50 to 1,000 to use Friday to get used to the data. We understand that, people departments, HR departments are under pressure. They're not really getting their checkbooks out at the moment. So come and use it, see if you like the data, work with it, use it. Mm-hmm. And no better time, to be honest. I mean, like we're talking about that transition back in, being able to monitor the actual effects of the decisions being made, phasing in, not phasing in, all of these kind of things. And I know from people I speak to, there is some anxiety about how they will be asked to go back to work, when they'll be asked, if all of these things. And I think being able to measure the impacts on a real-time basis is going to be essential, because risk.
I think it's always been important, but particularly with remote working, and you're not picking up the vibe just naturally. We're a tool that helps you pick up that vibe statistically. So but I think it's always been helpful, because people they don't know what's going on in different teams, and when you see the data, you do. And so actually, you don't know what you don't know. Now you do know, and actually it helps you. If you want to consistently create a good culture across your organization, you need data, and you need data that you can look at on a monthly basis at the very least. And so, and you need to know who's able to recover from setbacks and who isn't, because that's about resilience. So everyone has setbacks. Every team has setbacks. Every organization has setbacks. It's ridiculous to think everyone can be happy all the time, but it's how much quickly you bounce back. That's the thing. And the data will show you that. And that's one of the reasons we do weekly, because if there's a shock to the system, it's normally contained within a working week, and or it might go into the next week, but then it, and it's really dangerous if it's 3 or 4 weeks in a row. Whereas one bad week and people recover is not a danger signal. It's there's a shock to the system, we bounce back.
Mm-hmm. You can learn quickly, and if there was a particular decision that was made or an act or something, you can know not to repeat that quite quickly.
I mean, it's normally a little more diffuse than that, but yes, of course, and it's often about relationships,
Right.
Though actually at the moment, I think where we got expression, I don't think it's about relationships. I think it's about sort of monotony and isolation. One thing I'd say in that sense, it is relationships, is isolation from your colleagues.
Yeah. And where can people find out more about Friday Pulse and you, Nic?
Yes. So I'm quite active on LinkedIn. So Nic Marks has no K, so it's NIC Marks. I also have my own website, nicmarks.org. It's .org because it was when I was in the not-for-profit sector, and I've had it for 15 years or whatever. And then Friday Pulse, fridaypulse.com is our website. You can find out there about the free offer. You can sign up for newsletters. We produce a newsletter pretty much every week. Some weeks we have to skip for operational reasons, but three a month at least. Mm-hmm. And lots of good stuff in that. So that's where you can mainly find me.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for giving up your time. It's been a really interesting talk, and hopefully we'll do it again at some point.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. It's great.